Humans and demons have been at war for 15 years, with both sides making raids to seize territories from each other. This has led to ongoing friction and continuous battles between the two races. Amidst this conflict, a hero, Yusha, was born among the humans. He and his 3 companions fought and won many battles, becoming the hope of humanity to end the war. Perhaps too eager to defeat the Mao, he left his companions and ventured alone directly to Mao's palace. Yusha's original intention was indeed to assassinate Mao. However, upon infiltrating the deepest part of Mao's palace and reaching the throne room, he saw a figure and launched an attack without hesitation. The figure turned around, revealing herself to be a striking red-haired woman. Yusha stumbled and blushed, realizing that this young girl was the 43rd generation Mao, who confirmed her identity with the emblem on her chest. Yusha stepped back, suspecting a trap. He calmed himself, declaring he wouldn't fall for such tricks. Unexpectedly, Mao had no intention of battling him. She revealed that she had been waiting for Yusha, wanting to speak with him for a long time. As soon as she spoke, she said, "Become mine, Yusha." Yusha responded that the demon race had initiated the war and destroyed many nations, which he found unforgivable. Mao explained that it was all a misunderstanding. She had only punished those who committed evil acts. Humans always blamed the demon race, she countered, asking if he only saw the demons harming humans and not the other way around. She argued that there is no absolute right or wrong in this world. Mao took out a scroll, ready to discuss with Yusha the benefits that the war had brought. Meanwhile, some celebrated the war against the demons because it had united humanity. The war had alleviated diseases and famines that had persisted for over 500 years and even brought immense wealth to the central continent. When internal strife arises, there are always those who try to ignite wars, and the demon race was no different. Previously engaged in bloody battles for the throne, they now all followed her command. Yusha suggested that if Mao truly did not want to wage war, he could accompany her to surrender. However, Mao insisted the war could not yet end. The border prince, also troubled by the ongoing conflict, did not understand why the war continued. Before the war, his nation had been struggling, but after it began, they received donations from the central nations. Yusha pointed out that these nations were merely donating without benefiting themselves. Mao informed him that at least they gained security. Although surrounded by war, the nations of the central continent lived as if in another world. She handed Yusha a lamp, and as he took it, visions of the affluent life on the central continent appeared before him, where banquets were held every night as if there was no war. Mao explained that it was precisely because of the war that they could live this way. If the war disappeared, the central continent would lose its supply sources, leading to massive unemployment, food shortages, and even starvation. However, war is a double-edged sword. It brings food to nations that lack it, but food does not appear out of thin air. Some gain food while others starve. Without war, the world would have many people who know nothing but fighting and would struggle to survive without food, resulting in millions of deaths. Yusha was incredulous. The truth was indeed as such. Mao stated that regardless of whether the war is won or lost, humanity is headed towards extinction. Therefore, they did not deploy their armies but instead sent Yusha alone. If the demon race were victorious, they would seek slaves and increase their colonies on human territories. Conversely, if humans won, they would do the same on the demons' lands. Yusha wanted to refute Mao, but she told him that many worlds have been destroyed this way. She showed Yusha the scene she had always dreamed of. There were no luxurious palaces or indulgences, just green mountains and clear waters. She wanted to see what the other side of a world without war looked like. To pursue this dream, she needed Yusha to become hers. In return, she would discuss giving half of the world's territories to Yusha. Initially, Yusha wanted to refuse, but after hearing Mao's analysis, he realized he no longer wanted to fight. Besides half of the autonomous regions, Mao offered herself to Yusha. She also wanted all of Yusha. Yusha blushed at this. Mao quietly told Yusha that if she declared the end of the war, the human kings would not agree and would likely select another from the demon race and name them Mao. It shows that both sides need the war. However, Mao wanted to change all that, a hope unprecedented for the 3,000 worlds. She needed more than just Yusha's help to stop the war. She also had a great fondness for him and wanted someone to accompany her to see the scenery of the world's other side after the war. Yusha blushed again. Mao also felt a bit insecure, believing she didn't possess the physical attributes, personality, or facial features that men found attractive, such as having lots of excess flesh on her hands. However, she had one advantage. She would never betray him. Whether Yusha was sick or old, she would always stay by his side. She belonged to Yusha. Thus, Yusha agreed to become Mao's person, and the two signed a contract. Mao happily hugged Yusha, who shyly pushed her away. Mao stated that the first issue to tackle was the food problem. At that moment, Mao took off the horns on her head, which turned out to be merely decorative. Mao needed Yusha to accompany her on trips to various places to observe and solve the food problem in person. Disguised, the two arrived at a peaceful small village, lush with foliage and livestock. Maid Chu had prepared a house there in advance and concealed Mao's real identity, proclaiming to the villagers that they were there for agricultural research. Maid Chu had taken care of Mao since she was a child and was very happy to hear about Mao's marriage to Yusha. The two immediately expressed shyly that it was just an indefinite contract, but to Chu, this was equivalent to marriage. Meanwhile, rumors circulated outside that Mao and Yusha were both gravely injured after their great battle, with Mao recuperating in the palace and Yusha's whereabouts unknown. Mao actually had knowledge of agriculture and even prepared for crop rotation every season, with each time and each plot having different seeds. After rotation, the land could rest, and the plants grown could nourish the soil and feed the livestock. This planting method was very suitable for areas lacking land, since land development would definitely lead to disputes. Their goal was to eliminate famine. However, the village chief was an unreasonable person and did not quite agree with their plan. Mao decided to first spread knowledge among everyone. Back at home, Mao asked Yusha to sit by her side by the fire. Shyly, Mao offered that Yusha could rest his head on her lap. Yusha didn't hesitate and laid down immediately, as he was already Mao's person. It was then that Mao reached out and stroked his hair. Just as their relationship seemed to become more intimate, and they were about to kiss, the horses outside suddenly neighed. They rushed out and found a pair of sisters in the stable, soaked through. Chu came over and said that these were likely slaves from the neighboring village. Yusha detested the slave system, finding it barbaric and cruel. However, Mao knew these people were serfs, who differed from ordinary slaves. They could own personal belongings, houses, and agricultural tools, and even live with their families. But they lacked the right to choose their profession or relocate, and were the main labor force of the estate, bound to work ceaselessly. Normally, if they encountered runaway slaves like these, they would notify the estate owner to come and retrieve them. Yusha felt that sending them back was too cruel. Cho, however, told Yusha that people without choices were no different from insects. If they harbored these two, it could be dangerous for everyone in the village. Still, Mao didn't order her to contact anyone right away. Instead, she had Cho prepare some clothes and food, letting the two rest for the night. The sisters were very grateful for Mao's help and pleaded with her not to report them the following morning. The younger sister believed they could escape to a big city to live. Cho cruelly pointed out that this was impossible, saying their so-called escape would only endanger those who sheltered them. Just as Yusha was about to speak, Mao shook her head at him. Chu continued, saying that those who cannot control their own fate are no different from insects. But what she despised were people who were content to live like insects. She advised the girls, who apologized for bursting into their home uninvited, then asked Cho how they could become true humans. This time, Cho didn't rebuke them, but told them that no bowing or kneeling was necessary. A proper, elegant greeting was enough. Turning to Mao, Chu asked if she could hire someone new, as she was overwhelmed with work. Yusha joked that she just said how much she disliked these people. Chu clarified that what she hated were insects, not people. And as a maid, she didn't dislike them. Eventually, the sisters stayed. The younger sister was tasked with delivering bread to Yusha and now, under Mao's guidance, was learning to read and write, aiming to earn a lot of money to live happily with her elder sister. This made Yusha very emotional, feeling like he hadn't accomplished much. The younger sister, looking at a giant boar behind them, commented that Yusha was being too modest. Yusha mentioned that he was only skilled with the sword. Meanwhile, Mao was holding a class, attracting people to attend. Someone asked about the Central Kingdom's expeditionary force, an army deployed to exterminate the demon race. Mao stated that the existence of the expeditionary force had two purposes: to end the war and to transport the economy. However, two nobles in the class doubted this, believing that under the Lord's control, no one would starve. An older sister in the class, who was also attending, expressed her pain, saying that these people had obviously never experienced hunger, which saddened Mao. She had intended to spread knowledge but didn't expect that humans, especially children, would be so difficult to enlighten. Afterwards, Yusha accompanied Mao to continue attending classes at the village chief's house. He had temporarily won over the nobles, who were now willing to farm according to his methods. It was estimated that the results would be visible by next year. 3 months had passed since they started attending classes, and the land was indeed beginning to nurture new plants. The villagers gradually started to believe in Mao's words and would greet them warmly on the road. Yusha felt wistful, wishing he too could farm. Later, Yusha took Mao to a city where a church was located. This church worshipped the spirit of light, and people from nobles to slaves deeply believed in the existence of spirits. Yusha did not believe in spirits, but he had a favorable impression of the church because it taught people to read and write, and even helped research some peculiar existences. For this reason, the church had more influence than the king. Mao expressed her anticipation for the church's organizational power. When the two arrived inside the church, they did not notice someone observing them through a window. While Yusha and Mao were chatting, a nun suddenly rushed in. Hearing Yusha claim to be a swordsman, she looked up angrily and uttered the name Yusha. Yusha then realized that this nun was the female knight from his previous team. Yusha had left without telling them, planning to kill Mao on his own, which had worried the female knight and the other teammates. Seeing him now, she slapped him and then asked him about the beautiful woman he was now protecting. Mao explained that she had found Yusha after they had both been severely injured in battle. He stayed to repay her by serving as her guard. It turned out that the female knight had reported Yusha's departure to Mao's castle. A month later, a messenger told them that Yusha had fiercely struck Mao with his sword, but his fate was unknown, allowing their companions to receive a reward. However, the female knight said that a female magician had followed in Yusha's footsteps and had gone to the demon world alone. Yusha was shocked, admitting his mistake, but he believed that the female magician was not in danger due to her strength. Mao and Yusha had come to promote potatoes to the monastery. They had previously prepared potato dishes for others to try. The female knight tasted one and found it delicious. Mao stated that this plant was highly nutritious, resilient, and produced 3 times the yield of wheat. However, it was poisonous if it sprouted, so it needed to be handled with care. If stored properly, it could help many hungry people. Unfortunately, the nun could not provide funds to help. Mao was not there to ask for money. She hoped the monastery would build a small church in the village where she was conducting her experiments to teach local farmers how to increase their productivity. Ideally, more monasteries would be built to promote this farming method to everyone. She hoped to grow more food and stop the war. The female knight was moved and willing to help, even preparing to personally visit the experimental village. This left Yusha quite flustered. However, Mao did not panic, instead welcoming her warmly. The atmosphere between the two women quickly became tense, as Mao thought the female knight was Yusha's ex-girlfriend, seemingly jealous. Continuous farming could also damage the land, needing external nutrients to be replenished regularly. Ideally, they would enrich the soil with manure. Yusha suggested he could move to the seaside to buy fish. Mao said this would be too troublesome, and the largest fish-supplying city was controlled by a demon who was difficult to deal with. Most importantly, this demon's allies included the southern independent city and free merchants, forming an economic alliance. That place nearly encompasses all the merchants of the central continent, with its economic assets reaching astronomical figures. Yusha suddenly remembered that he had once given a speech in the south. Mao pondered that there should be a reward of several hundred gold coins, but Yusha, with a pained expression, mentioned only 15 coins. Reflecting on this, he felt truly useless. Afterwards, Mao secluded herself for 2 months, during which she developed a compass that could guide one in any location. The merchants of the alliance couldn't get enough of it, but they decided to probe Mao's depths. Recently, It was said that Mao was still practicing with the monastic order, making them worry about monopolizing the benefits of the compass. A group of them even considered negotiating to secure a share of the compass's profits, as they lacked the strength to assassinate anyone. In the village, hunters would bring food to the maid sisters, who, despite their different backgrounds, greatly admired Mao and those around her, causing Maid Ane some melancholy. One night, Yusha, fully armed and unable to sleep out of concern for the female magician, prepared to venture to the demon realm to find her. Mao provided him with a letter for his journey to the demon realm. Before leaving, recalled what Cho had told her. Yusha was clearly a virgin and should let Mao take the initiative. Yusha, very shy, said he would speak after the war. Mao, however, mentioned that she had been here for half a year without gaining a decisive advantage. Yusha was even bringing luggage to visit girlfriend number 2. How could she not be jealous? Facing Mao's request for a kiss, Yusha only dared to shyly kiss her forehead before hurriedly running off with the items Mao had given him, while Mao said she would always wait for his return. Cho was preparing new clothes for Mao as the Merchants' Alliance arrived for negotiations. The female knight, upon hearing that Yusha had run off to find the female magician, smashed the luggage in anger and caught a group of naive nobles for intense training. Chu worried about Mao's safety and could only pray for Yusha's swift return. Mao stated that at crucial moments they could flee, as they always relied on Yusha. Meanwhile, the merchants indeed wanted to secure the compass through negotiations, but had prepared for the worst. The demon tribe was already lurking outside, and Mao dressed up to command presence. The compass was merely a prop to lure these people. What she truly wanted to promote was corn. What a pair of food weapons, Mao did not hide. She directly told these two that corn could grow in arid, barren lands, areas of the central continent yet to be developed. Although it would cost money to send people to plant it, it was a huge business opportunity. If they could establish new villages on these barren lands, those villages would become complete pawns of the Merchants' Alliance, a vast market. Besides corn, wood, salt, iron, and cloth, the local villagers would purchase other things, essentially buying from Mao the concept of how to plant these items. The Merchant Alliance didn't understand why she was doing this, since once the concept was sold, they could develop it further without Mao's help. Mao stated that her goal wasn't those items. Her aim was to end the war as soon as possible. The merchants immediately stated that the war couldn't end unless humanity won. Mao believed that was just an external viewpoint. Their alliance was the war's biggest donor. He made a gesture behind his back, and the assassins lurking outside immediately received orders. However, every move they made was observed by the demon tribe's ghosts and reported back to Cho. While the merchants spoke of fighting for humanity's victory, in reality, they were just profiting from the war, merely putting on a righteous facade. Today, Mao's straightforward exposure left them unable to save face. Mao openly admitted that he was not siding with anyone and was only plotting for his own interests. Faced with interests, how could a merchant refuse? The merchant laughed and dropped all pretenses. The benefits Mao offered were enough to tempt him, so a contract was signed by both parties. When the assassins saw the signal, they also withdrew. The merchant greatly admired Mao and even asked if he could propose to Mao, which left Mao dumbfounded, just as she was about to explain. The merchant then admitted his rashness, acknowledging he hadn't brought enough dowry, and looked forward to meeting Mao again. Meanwhile, Yusha went out and almost lost his wife. Even though Mao refused, the merchant did not plan to give up. At the same time, the old man and Yusha's team received information about potatoes and the construction of windmills and water systems. Their nation was not very wealthy and lacked water. The prince thought that if the war ended, he hoped the buildings of the monastic order could be promoted in their area. However, once the war ceased, the funding from various nations would stop, and their country would be the first to perish. Mao was also revising the documents of the demon tribe. Half a year had passed, and Yusha had still not returned. Although he wrote letters saying he had saved some elves and fought a fierce battle with a fire dragon who admired him and wanted to marry off the princess to him, this made Mao anxious. If Yusha dared to betray, she would be the first to bite him. What Mao did not know was that Yusha always came back. He wrote the letters from home. Cho noticed he was avoiding Mao. Although she did not know why, she still respected Yusha's thoughts. Yusha also had teleportation magic and could come back once a week if he wanted, but his absence worried Mao. Yusha realized that Mao did not really depend on him. Initially, when they first met, she always wanted him to be her person. At first, he thought Mao wanted to use his power to clear the rebels among the demons, but Mao never used his power and even cherished him, not wanting him to fight recklessly. Yet the contract was mutual, and the thought of Mao crying if he died accidentally troubled him deeply. Chu pointed out that since he had signed a contract and belonged to Mao, all his feelings and thoughts should also belong to Mao, reminding Yusha of this. That day, Meidemuto noted that the town fair was soon, and she looked forward to Yusha coming back to dance with Mao. Meanwhile, on the southern front line where humans and demons clashed, the prince could not help but curse the expeditionary force. They were even considering naval battles against small islands occupied by demons for the sake of interests, risking over 7,000 lives for their ambitions. Ain also wanted to learn fighting, admiring the female knight, and even built a large glass house in the village, nearly exhausting her funds. Although Ane had learned a lot recently and everyone was kind to her, she still wondered if she truly qualified as a dignified human being. The church also insisted on taking back Aurora Island, having spent a lot of money there. Not fighting would lose public support, and the battle might even affect the election of the Pope. The Merchants' Alliance made many compasses, hoping that if they won the war and reclaimed Aurora Island, they could secure the western sea routes. Meanwhile, Mao had ordered a large amount of herring from them, claiming it could be used to nourish the fields. These despicable merchants are essentially profiting from war. The battle for Aurora Island has been taken over by another general, who criticized the previous commander's tactics before even starting the war. The prince feels that with such command, defeat is inevitable. On the land taken from the demon tribe by humans, soldiers were found brazenly oppressing a demon girl serving drinks. Thankfully, Yusha stepped in just in time to stop them. From the demon girl, Yusha learned that those who had bullied him were part of the expeditionary force's stationed troops. 4 army units rotate into the city, each committing egregious acts upon their return. Those who stay in the city, of noble birth, mercilessly bully the demon tribe in their safe haven because the demons had lost and were to be trampled upon. Yusha couldn't believe it. Was this the result of his efforts? If humans won, would all demons end up like this? Or if the demons won, would the situation simply reverse? Yusha kept gathering intelligence, pondering what Mao would do. The demon girl led him eastward and asked why, as a human, he was loyal to Mao. Yusha explained that although he belonged to Mao, it wasn't because he lost to her. Victory wasn't an excuse to oppress others. Like Mao, he was seeking the best way forward. Meanwhile, the southern nations were forced into war. Over 200 ships sailed, soon attacked by giant squids around the small islands, dragging the first 2 commanders into the sea. The prince's father died in battle, and those clamoring for war unrelentingly blamed the prince's father, insisting on buying new ships to continue fighting. The prince declared that his father died, upholding his beliefs. But the current incompetent command was what truly led to the death of 6,000 soldiers. The prince decided to take his father's place and restart the war, believing the unfolding events were his fault. If he hadn't pushed Yusha to the front lines initially, things might not have turned out this way. He intended to inherit the legacies of Yusha and his father to bring light to the nation. Before he left, he summoned the female knight, who took her leave from Mao. Mao admitted her role in the war, having supplied the compasses and food. The female knight, one of Mao's rare female friends aside from Chu, accepted Mao's confession. Unexpectedly, the knight, acting in the name of the Light Elves and as a nun, forgave Mao quickly. What Mao didn't know was that Yusha had met with the female knight alone before leaving, and had already revealed the truth about Mao. The knight stated that although Mao and Yusha had a contract, she had another with Yusha and would never betray him. Therefore, she would trust those Yusha trusted, and was prepared to befriend Mao openly, wishing no harm to anyone. In the evening, Mao did not attend the banquet. Instead, she stayed at home alone. It had been a year since she last saw Yusha, and all she could do was pull out a body pillow of him to keep her company. She longed to hear Yusha praise her again. Unexpectedly, at that moment, Yusha's voice suddenly reached her. complimenting her for doing a great job. After being moved by his words, Mao, in a rush of emotion, grabbed the body pillow and knocked Yusha to the ground. She demanded to know where he had been all year, upset that he had only written letters and not visited her. Yusha hurriedly explained that he had been busy with the affairs of the Open Gate City, figuring out how to transport supplies to the fortress and finding ways to weaken the extremists. He mentioned that many people there were trying hard to live their lives, and he couldn't just destroy their efforts. Mao became angry, suspecting that Yusha's popularity with women had made him too proud. Yusha began to feel aggrieved, mentioning that nobles and merchants had proposed to him, which troubled him deeply. Mao declared that she had a clear conscience, and at this, Yusha showed a pitiful face. The two of them didn't feel any awkwardness despite the long separation. As the music from the New Year's celebration outside wafted in, they began to dance in the hall. Mao was about to kiss Yusha, but just then, the music outside stopped. Their actions were driven by emotion but stopped by propriety. Yusha then donned black armor, preparing to return. They agreed to meet again next month when the Open Gate City would be operational. Meanwhile, Mao was about to head to the Arctic island to assist, while Yusha, now at the Open Gate City, deep within demon territory, had transformed into an undead knight. He used illusions to scare the people, along with nightmares sent specifically to terrorize the expeditionary forces. On the other side, the female knight and the old man had become temporary generals in this battle. At the Open Gate City, the nobles were so terrified by nightmares that they begged to be recalled home. Neither money, wine, nor the demon female slaves at headquarters could keep them there. They were infuriated and expressed their unwillingness to stay in a city filled with the stench of demons. When Mao walked into the command tent, the old man's eyes widened in surprise, and the female knight broke into a cold sweat. Had Mao's identity been discovered? Unexpectedly, the old man, who turned out to be a rogue, shyly expressed a desire to check her bust size, which led the female knight to knock him out cold. The prince only knew of Mao as a scholar who helped their country grow food. Mao was curious why the prince was insistent on retaking the Arctic island at this time. The prince explained that it was to restore his father's honor and regain control over the sea routes, which would enable their nation to trade and become economically independent, no longer needing to fight wars on command from the central authorities. Mao promised to give the prince a gift and brought with her 6 carts of expensive salt, essential for their campaign. The salt was needed to melt the ice layer, making it stronger for them to walk on as they advanced towards the island. This salt in exchange gave them a whole day where they did nothing. Mao stated that what she sought was not victory, but something that victory alone could not bring. Upon hearing of the humans' landing, the demon tribe on the island sent out squids again, turning the sea almost red with blood. With the foundation laid, the squids were slain, coloring the ice and the sky with hues of blood. They broke through the demon tribe's second line of defense, with around 500 casualties. But there are many natural caves on the island. The fortress, hidden in the deepest part. In the castle, there is also the fiercest warrior of the demon tribe, with an estimated 8,000 demons present. To conquer such a fortress, they would need at least 3 times that number on their side. They knew Mao had a plan. Suddenly, from behind the Aurora Island, a teleportation array brought nearly 10,000 soldiers. Indeed, they were the noble expeditionary force frightened away by Yusha from the Open Gate City. The expeditionary force, terrified by Yusha's identity as an undead knight, claimed they were running to provide reinforcements for Aurora Island. As for the merchants in the Open Gate City who trafficked military supplies, he felt they were colluding with the demons and did not wish to protect them. Blocked by his aides, in anger, he tossed the commander's responsibilities onto them. With over 10,000 expeditionary troops gone, the new commander and deputy had no way to protect the humans here. They could only bow to the local demons and establish a new government. From today, this place would no longer be a human territory, but a city of exchange between humans and demons. The prince had thought this was the best chance for a surprise attack, but at this moment, Yusha suddenly appeared. The female knight immediately ran over joyfully. Yusha quickly pulled her back, scratching his head awkwardly towards Mao. Mao's goal was to make the demons see the situation clearly and preferably choose to retreat. But then, the fierce warrior ran over. Initially, Yusha was prepared to act, but the female knight stated that now it was her mission. This fierce warrior was a giant seal. Both of them indeed had considerable strength. As they continuously fought, the female knight struck down the seal general with a single sword blow. Cheers erupted from everyone. However, the female knight stated they couldn't be too happy now. They still had to search the island to see if any demon remnants remained. Seeing her own kind killed, the female knight was still saddened. Yusha wrapped his arm around her shoulder. On this side, the prince had taken Aurora Island in the evening during the victory banquet. He specifically honored Mao and the female knight with titles. The old man specifically went to find Yusha. He said Yusha was too strong, and ordinary people could not accept him. His power would make people fearful. The old man knew that Yusha had left to prevent them from being treated the same way. But in the old man's view, Yusha was also a person. They were sorry to leave Yusha alone. After the separation, the old man worked hard, directly assisting the prince, hoping that those responsibilities would not fall on Yusha. He also hoped Yusha could find his own place. Now it was autumn. Yusha and Mao had a chance to be alone, but the female knight always found various excuses to check on them. After the prince ascended to power, he led the nation's economy towards positive development, and the apprentices Mao had taught were also sent to assist the prince. But Ane still had unresolved issues. On the other side, the female knight was practicing swordplay with Yusha. Both of them were drenched in sweat and ran directly to the well to splash water. The female knight, who had a crush on Yusha, didn't hold back and started washing up without her top, making Yusha somewhat embarrassed. Sitting and viewing the courtyard scenery, the female knight wished it could always be like this. Having strong combat capabilities could completely end the war, but the problem is, regardless of who wins, after the war there would still be no true peace. But Mao wanted to save both humans and demons, so Yusha greatly admired Mao. The female knight felt defeated. Yusha mentioned that the female knight had been making impressive changes to the people's welfare recently. Imudo heard from Mao that after the carbonated water, they even managed to create an orange-flavored soda. Mao reflected that this child might become a fine chef in the future, which made Imudo very happy. Recently, the Open Gate City is organizing an exchange meeting. Yusha will represent Mao to attend and communicate. The commander left in Open Gate City had a good reputation previously and was the leader of the eastern fortresses. Therefore, even when the expeditionary forces left, many demons in Open Gate City still respected them. Yusha and the commander of Open Gate City became friends. They drank and ate meat together when the Dragon King's daughter and a demon girl came looking for them, insisting on calling themselves Yusha's wives. However, at that moment, the earth suddenly shook. Even Mao, who stayed in the experimental village, felt it. Chu looked very upset. Mao said it had been 2 years already and she was satisfied to have delayed this long. She asked Cho to pack up and move her bed to the demon palace, saying she would return soon and not to worry. Not long after, Mao took Ane with her, asking Yusha to teleport them to the Iron Kingdom. Mao said that Ane was very smart, smarter than some nobles and merchants, so she has been guiding Ane to learn more. Knowledge alone can make people realize the stakes in the world, so Mao is preparing to spread knowledge using the printing press she created in the Iron Kingdom, which can print thousands of sheets of paper a day. Yusha admired this greatly and then fell into a deep sleep. Late at night, the female knight, bringing tea, came to Yusha's room and coincidentally met Mao. The two argued, and at this moment, Cho kicked them into the room, starting a 3-person living arrangement. Eventually, they each chose a side of the bed, with Yusha in the middle being petted like a dog. However, Mao told the female knight that she would return to the Mao Palace next week to pay homage to the tombs of past Maos. Without proper governance of the demons, some radical factions might provoke wars, as most in the demon world still favor conflict. The female knight thought this was too risky. Mao mentioned that aside from him, no one could enter the Mao tomb, but Cho would wait for him outside. Before leaving, he left a lot of materials, knowing the maid sisters would know what to do. He entrusted the female knight to take good care of Yusha. The next day, Yusha expressed a desire to go with Mao. Knowing that other countries were also restless recently, Mao knew Yusha needed to stay. She gave a ring to Ane, which could disguise her as Mao, because without him, others might not trust Ane in dealings. Yusha sent Mao and Cho back to the demon world, promising they would meet again soon. A merchant came to visit the experimental village again, this time meeting Ane disguised as Mao. During the meeting, when the topic of counterfeits appearing in the trade line came up, Ane realized her disguise was discovered. At that moment, Yusha stepped forward. He did not let Ane be embarrassed, but instead took off the ring and let her rest. The merchant also understood Mao's intentions. Yusha and the merchant hadn't seen each other for some time, but the merchant still remembered that Yusha had once made him spend only 15 gold coins, yet earn a lot. Both felt that the other had changed a lot, and the merchant showed that he truly had feelings for Mao. But Yusha just mentioned what the merchant said before he left, that as long as he returns alive, he would host a party full of opulence. The merchant asked Yusha when he planned to attend, so he could prepare in advance. Unexpectedly, Yusha took him along with a triple teleportation. The merchant was caught off guard, and then was taken to the now neutral, open gate city. Yusha told the merchant that Mao is a demon. The outside world says that all the humans here have been slaughtered. He teleported with the merchant into a tavern where there was no oppression between the human and demon races. This city had surprisingly become the only peaceful place between the two races. Yusha said that Mao also recognized the city's autonomy, with 1/3 of the administrators being human, while he actually represented the demons. The merchant did not understand why Yusha was telling him all this. Yusha expressed that he did not want to revert to being the lonely Yusha. At that time, the dragon race princess who likes Yusha had already received Yusha's notice and promised to give him a perfect party experience. Meanwhile, Mao encountered a trinity of female mages. Yusha and the others were having a great time at the party, so he took the opportunity to ask the merchant what he thought of Open Gate City. The merchant said that there were sources of wealth everywhere. Yusha said he could sell the rights to the merchant. The merchant's first response was to ask what Yusha wanted. The merchant always calculated losses and gains first, which made him cold and ruthless. But Yusha knew that after meeting Mao, the merchant first realized that there are some things in the world that cannot be measured. He also wanted to meet the being that the merchant considered immeasurable. That was the price he offered for the rights. Chu waited for Mao, who returned from the external library meeting with the female mages. Mao was preparing to enter the sealed land of the previous Maos. 2 years had passed, and the souls of those guys had made the seal unstable. It was supposed that Mao entering could stabilize the seal, but it came with certain risks. The next time she came out, she might have lost her sanity. Before entering, she told Cho that if the person who comes out is no longer her, then they should fight with all their might. The female knight gave her loyalty and sword to Yusha. She acknowledged that Mao was a formidable person and knew that Yusha belonged to Mao. She had no delusions of competing, but as a knight, she had never dedicated her sword to anyone else. Thus, she could only be considered a half-hearted knight, but she had chosen Yusha. She wanted to be Yusha's knight. If Yusha and Mao were to step into the future, she hoped to have her place there, not to be left behind like last time. So when Yusha drew that sword, she offered her eternal loyalty to him and declared that her body and soul belonged to Yusha. Other hunters were delivering things to the maid sisters. They felt that Mao and Chao were very kind to them, but Ane still felt something was off and was somewhat melancholic. Meanwhile, the prince suddenly received a message from the church demanding that he arrest someone. At the same time, the merchant also obtained first-hand intelligence, and even the nuns were preparing to call the female knight back. That evening, Imudo made a roasted whole chicken and received praise from Yusha and the female knight, making her very happy, as it meant she no longer had to be a serf. The sister patted her younger sister's head, and Yusha was curious about what Ani wanted to do. Before Ani could answer, the prince and others came over late at night, saying that the church considered Mao an evil being and even claimed that potatoes were the devil's fruit. Her acts of cultivating and spreading knowledge affected the church. Once the church's monopoly was broken, she would be branded a heretic. They even used the light spirit as an excuse. The female knight was unusually furious. However, Mao was not here now. The prince and the old man came early to report, seeking advice from Mao. Yet, the ring Mao left behind was not useless. They could find a scapegoat, but Yusha flatly refused. No one's life should be replaced by another. Nevertheless, Yusha still asked Ane to pretend to be captured. When the time came to leave the prince's country, Yusha would rescue her at the border. In this way, only Yusha would be opposing the church. The old man was saddened that he had to let Yusha face everything alone. At this moment, the female knight stepped forward, declaring she would go together. Yusha, however, said the female knight had her own place to protect. The prince was also very sad, feeling he was not competent enough. His sister was somewhat sad to hear they were moving. The female knight knew Yusha's strength. He could annihilate an expeditionary force. Yusha expressed that Mao did not like such brutal methods. Hence, he would go and return shortly. Initially, the church used the previous commander as a puppet, but unexpectedly, the opponent was defeated. The church's authority plummeted sharply. Coincidentally, a hero like the prince appeared, reclaiming land and gaining the people's hearts. With Mao's help, the country's food supply also increased. Therefore, the church targeted them. The merchants began to think and prepared to form a new alliance. The ice country's minstrel, also Mao's disciple Ratsuan Kaikei, was tasked with collecting intelligence and delaying time. He readily agreed. The other citizens also felt that Mao could not possibly be a heretic. Ane said that Mao was truly beloved. When they walked in the village, the villagers always greeted and gave them things. There was never a lack of food on the table. Although she was just an ordinary serf, because she served Mao, she was regarded as an equally formidable being by the villagers. The people in this village were kind, but now they only had to say goodbye to the villagers. She comforted Ane not to worry. Yusha would definitely find a way to save her. However, looking at the ring, Ane seemed thoughtful. After everyone left, she cried, feeling helpless and unable to assist. Below, the crowd was abuzz. A large number of troops and church personnel came over. Seeing the guy who called Mao a heretic appear, anger shone in the people's eyes. At that moment, the disguised Mao was brought up. Not only did the church bind Mao, but they also publicly declared Mao was a demon. In front of everyone, they whipped the disguised Ane. The people below were furious, but the church's influence was too great. They couldn't oppose the church. The prince wanted to intervene, but was pulled back by the old man. They still had to endure. He promised that those who were violent would be doubly retaliated, but no one expected Ane to suddenly stand up. She told the people below that she was a serf's daughter. Her brother broke his hand while working. Her parents had died. Her sister was taken away and bullied by the local lord. Her younger brother died of a serious illness, burned by the local lord, leaving behind only a sister who had contracted smallpox. After being powerless, she took her sister and fled. She thought her fate would be the same, but unexpectedly, she encountered Grace there. With these words, she told the people below, "Rise up, you who are unwilling to be slaves. Regardless of our status or position, we must not give up thinking." The church could not bear these words and began to beat Ane. However, Ane told everyone that they believed in the spirit of light, and the spirit of light had given them the freedom of choice through their souls. Therefore, they must never abandon their human dignity. Whether it be princes or the church, freedom is an inviolable treasure. The people of the church knocked Ane to the ground and demanded that the crowd below throw stones to humiliate her. The crowd was instantly caught in a dilemma. Ane stood up and told them that the freedom to judge was also theirs. Even if she hoped they would throw stones, it was not to be out of blind obedience. She did not want to revert to being a worm. After Ane spoke, she fainted. At that moment, the crowd furiously picked up stones and threw them at the church's envoys. Enraged, the church's people cursed the crowd below for their ignorance, accusing them of betraying the church, and ordered their subordinates to behead Ane quickly. However, Ane was prepared to sacrifice herself while speaking those words. Unexpectedly, the prince intervened, openly defying and beginning to purge the church. Influenced by Mao's words, the prince realized that his role was not to obey, but to resist, as he was the king of this country. Moreover, the female knight, also a nun of the church, felt ashamed of the envoy's actions and, invoking the name of the spirit of light, suppressed them. The prince also announced to the people that he would officially provide asylum to Mao. The lakeside convent where the female knight resided also recognized Mao as a saint. The crowd cheered in support of Mao, demanding the church envoy to leave. Since both sides had openly broken ties, the church envoy declared that they would certainly not let them go unchallenged. Meanwhile, A demon saw the segment of Ane's speech while she was disguised as Mao. Yusha and others praised Ane for being so powerful that she managed to make the church's army retreat with mere words. Mao had kept a secret. Historically, every Mao had contemplated stopping wars, and each generation of Yusha had chosen them. However, almost none succeeded in reforming because while it was Mao who wanted to change the world, it was also Mao who would destroy it. Yet, Mao still hoped for peace. Ane's speech inspired a wave of resistance in various regions, even proposing that the prince's country should become independent from the central church. They were discussing what to do next, with some suggesting the liberation of serfs to stand with the people. Due to the abundance of potatoes, the population they could support had also increased. However, such actions would be tantamount to openly waging war against the central authority. Their country was still too weak. If broken, the demons would swarm in. Yusha could not understand what the church truly intended. The female knight stated that while the church preached unity against demons, their real goal was to monopolize wealth, knowledge, and power. This led to the creation of a noble class, and thus, the world remained impoverished. Money hoarded does not grow. Only through continuous use and purchasing can wealth be circulated and created. Meanwhile, the church, in its quest to monopolize wealth, plunged others into poverty. Seeing everyone so troubled, Imuto brought them desserts. At that moment, Yusha had an idea. The lakeside convent where the female knight resided, though sharing the belief in the spirit of light with the church, differed from it. It was the Orthodox national religion. The merchant receiving Yusha's message felt that Yusha and Mao's styles were strikingly similar. At this moment, the person discovered that the letter was actually blank paper, and moreover, the writing on it was not handwritten. At this time, he recalled the trap that Mao had previously set up. It was said that over 3,000 pieces of similar paper had been distributed. The merchant realized that reform was imminent. He instructed his deputy to go out and, without attracting attention, do everything possible to buy up hard currencies like silver and gold. But more important than these was food. They were to buy as much as they could, leaving nothing for the outside world. His goal was not to acquire these goods, but to sell coins. This was because, with the liberation of serfs, a substantial population influx had occurred into the prince's country, the Alliance of Ice. They prepared to teach these people literacy through song, ideally while exposing the ugliness of the church. However, Ane felt this was not a good approach, as many of the populace still believed in the church's spirit of light. Engaging them early on might not be a wise idea. They could initially promote their own merits. Although developing the wilderness was challenging, there was no serfdom here, and anyone who worked hard could see hope, a blessing from the spirit of light. If they sang of this, people from other regions would also come. Meanwhile, the merchant had even pre-booked wheat that had not yet matured in the fields. This way, even if wheat prices soared later, they could acquire it at a low cost. Should war break out, they planned to artificially control wheat production. By the time the nobles could not buy wheat, the price would skyrocket to an extreme number. If unrest arose among the opposition, the merchant would profit, especially since he was also involved in corn trading. For safety, the merchant planned to directly move the Alliance's base to the Lake Nation, where the lakeside convent was located. They nearly monopolized the central food supply. The city on the other side was also troubled because, for some reason, they were running out of salt. Karyu Kujo went to discuss with the commander. Within the demon race, there was a lineage known as the Soma bloodline, known for producing the most mouse over generations, and having the strongest desire to conquer the human world. It was said that these demons had come to the open city to interact with humans. At this time, people in the central regions also noticed that wheat prices were becoming increasingly expensive. Even after selling slightly lower quality wheat, merchants did not hesitate to raise prices again. The merchant had already acquired a significant amount of wheat. If this continued, the central authorities would definitely not agree to continue exporting food. Thus, the merchant instructed his subordinates to pause purchases for 2 weeks, then discuss the situation of wheat transfer with other lords. Money talks, and generally, no one would obstruct it. If there was an obstruction, the matter would be handed over to the assassin organization. Meanwhile, another disciple of Mao, Shonen Shite, received a message from Ratsuan Kaikei. that wheat prices in the Central Kingdom had skyrocketed, causing prices for items like walnut beans to also surge. Many nobles also began to raise funds. Seeing this, Shunin Shite felt that someone was intentionally provoking war. Once money ceased to be central to other regions, they would definitely target the 3 southern countries, where prices had not yet risen for purchasing. This would potentially bankrupt their nation's economy. Thus, Shunin Shite suggested implementing tariffs. All goods exported from the 3 southern countries would need to have increased taxes, charging an extra 10 gold coins for each carriage. If they did not impose such high fees, their food would be bought up by the central regions, leading inevitably to a famine come winter. Indeed, the church had already started preparing for war. They had sent conscription orders to lords across the regions. One of the bald-headed lords, who dreamt of becoming an earl and had plenty of money, was willing to hire more mercenaries. The merchant had already set his plans in motion, and now it was up to the country where Mao resided to decide how to respond. However, he did not expect Karyu Kujo to come looking for him. She did not inform Yusha, but instead was reached through a kind-hearted female magician who teleported him. Karyu Kujo had come to buy salt. She did not specify the quantity, but hinted that salt was very valuable to the demon race. At this moment, the merchant suddenly remembered something Yusha had once said. He realized that the interactions between the 2 races were still too infrequent. They could benefit from each other without resorting to war. When Cho first heard that the woman in front of him wanted to become the true Mao, she was shocked. After all, doing so meant entering the inner sanctum of the demon palace, which could very likely result in the past Mao's taking over her body and consciousness. Mao clarified that it was not a takeover, but a corruption, and while a takeover might be salvageable, corruption was not. Regardless of the method, it was Mao's choice, and she was willing to bear all the sins. Her entry into the demon palace might weaken the demon race's combat effectiveness. Cho worried that she would not be able to rule the demons, but Mao suggested that ruling did not necessarily require violence. Moreover, she wanted to meet the person destined for her. Yes, she had always been looking forward to meeting Yusha. Chu was very worried because historically, Yusha came to assassinate Mao. Nevertheless, Mao still wanted to meet Yusha and see the world beyond the library. The prince had already received a formal declaration of war from the central authorities because of their tariffs. The central regions were unable to buy food, so they declared war, with the conflict set to begin in winter, at most 10 days from now. Yusha felt this was too quick and not the direction Mao had hoped for. Yusha did not want any sacrifices, but if it snowed, the enemy might not risk coming. The prince calculated that it might snow in 2 to 4 weeks. Meanwhile, Ane, following Mao's plan, was preparing books. The outside world, receiving news that Mao was still alive, thought otherwise. The previous commanders who had been defeated and fled held deep hatred for both Mao and the prince. They planned to launch a surprise attack on the prince's alliance at the onset of the war. At this time, the prince and his allies were discussing their battle strategy. The Central Expeditionary Forces numbered at least 10,000, while they could muster at most 4,500. Though unsure how long they could hold out, they aimed to minimize casualties. Surprisingly, demons also appeared at this time. The female knight was worried about problems with Mao. Yusha said he could handle the demons, but would avoid conflict as much as possible. The prince did not refuse his offer. Meanwhile, Shonin Shite met with the merchant and Karyu Kujo. The merchant knew that the person who proposed the tariffs was the one before him, and he admired him. Negotiations began between them. The merchant proposed a special exemption from tariffs for the alliance. This exemption was specifically for vehicles transporting goods through the 3 countries, not for goods purchased in the prince's country. Secondly, they wanted to lease part of Aurora Island in the form of a manor, and also proposed establishing a bank in the prince's country. Lastly, they expressed their desire to buy all the potatoes, even though potatoes were considered heretical seeds. The merchant apprentices know that the central authority is recasting coins, but everyone understands that it's just a show of force. The hero doesn't know how to end the war since he isn't the king who controls everything. However, he wishes for his friends to witness the arrival of peace. Rushing to the scene, the hero finds a large number of troops with supplies below. intending to make the demons retreat by destroying their supply carts. Unexpectedly, at this moment, the female mage appears behind him, indicating she will help the hero manage this situation. Just then, Cho notices that the demon lord has stepped out, and the entire basement has turned blood red. The demon lord says she wants to return not to the experimental village, but to the battlefield. Chu attacks the demon lord without hesitation, but is repelled by the demon lord's roar. The demon lord Cho worships is not someone who only thinks of fighting. Initially, it was the demon lord who gave her a new life, transforming her from an insect into a human. During their battle, however, Cho's arm is severed. The female mage sets up a portal for the hero and then tells him that the demon lord is waiting for him. She decides to stay behind to help with the demon situation, meaning she can no longer go to the demon's realm. The female mage mentions that the demon lord needs the hero. Meanwhile, the merchant apprentices hear that merchants want to reconstruct the economy by investing in wheat, realizing that these people intend to introduce a second type of currency to facilitate trade with the demons across the border. Unlike the state, they prioritize profit and have a different view of happiness. A little happiness brought by trade is enough for them. At this moment, Karyu Kujo also clarifies that she is the head of the only neutral gate city currently. Then, the female mage uses a powerful teleportation spell to send the traveling party back home. The hero immediately destroys the teleportation circle, which almost blows away the nearby station troops. Meanwhile, at the border, the troops see the former commander charging with a large force. They hide in trenches to shoot arrows, ostensibly to block, but actually to herd the soldiers into a prearranged trap. As the hero charges underground following an explosion, he discovers that the demon realm is actually an underworld. The female mage informs the hero that the demon lord is about to go berserk and urges him to hurry. Chu uses a soft voice to remind the demon lord of the hero, taking advantage of the moment to pin her down, then rushes out using a door to slow down the demon lord's speed. The hero flies all the way to the interior of the demon palace, finding it filled with a massive amount of demonic energy. He hadn't anticipated the demon lord's formidable combat power. Elsewhere, the female knight has plans in motion in the kingdoms about to go to war, spreading rumors that war is imminent and that hay is needed. The hay they sell is laced with a drug, causing the horses that eat it to suffer from diarrhea, a fate they prefer over dying on the battlefield. This plan is well organized, and as the one-eyed commander flees into the city during the chase, the demon lord's disciple, Gunjin Shite, orders an increase in patrols. Finally, the hero accelerates into the interior of the demon palace and sees the demon lord standing there. Cho alerts him that the demon lord in front of him is not the person he knew. She reveals that the current demon lord has been corrupted by the souls of past demon lords. The female mage meets with the prince and informs him of the hero's journey to the demon realm, and also reveals the demon lord's prior plan to eradicate smallpox. For people of that era, it was a demonic disease that could kill 3 million people a year. If someone contracted the disease, their house would be burned down with fire. Even the female mage did not know how to solve it. However, Mao wrote a note to him, saying that once smallpox was cured, the king should sign a decree before announcing it publicly. Their country was willing to provide vaccines, charging just 1 silver coin per person. The prince was shocked by this masterstroke. With it, they could end the war. Also asked the female mage to reveal to the prince their true nature as demons. Everyone understood that Mao wanted to show the outside world that the demons had helped humanity eliminate hunger and disease, and were eager to foster relations between demons and humans. Meanwhile, the fleeing one-eyed commander relentlessly pursued them, finding the maid sisters who were printing books, and mistook one of them for the real Mao. At this point, Yusha did not understand how Mao had sacrificed herself, because her departure made Ane a saint. However, the contaminated Mao's combat abilities were terrifying. She grabbed Yusha and demanded he become her subordinate. Yusha immediately refused. He belonged to Mao, but not to a tainted Mao. He teleported to embrace Mao, declaring that her body belonged to him and urged her to wake up as they belonged to each other. Mao struggled fiercely and finally suppressed the evil spirit. Together, they also healed Cho's severed hand. On another front, people noticed a shortage of food. The nobles thought gold was easier to carry than grain. but they forgot that gold alone couldn't feed them through the winter. Thus, they targeted the prince's country, which still had food, for war. However, before the war started, the command center was already in disarray, arguing over territory divisions before even winning the battle, and had to call the archbishop to mediate. The soldiers thought it was foolish. Was this what they called guidance from the light elves? At that time, the female knight received news that the date of the battle had not yet been set, but the enemy's mercenaries were acting on their own. Fearing that the enemy would use this as a pretext to launch a war with 20,000 troops, she tried to delay the matter as much as possible. Meanwhile, the maid sisters were almost killed by the one-eyed commander, but fortunately, Gunjin Shite arrived in time. He fought the commander, getting severely injured, but unexpectedly, Gunjin Shite had brought a metal arm. He used it to grab the commander as he pounced, and both fell off the rooftop. The maid sisters hurried downstairs and discovered the one-eyed man had died from the fall, while Gunjin Shite had luckily wedged his knife into the stairs, preventing his fall. As for the female knight's troops, they executed rapid strikes, killing some mercenaries. The command was reluctant to retreat and decided to chase in batches. However, the female knight's forces became increasingly scattered, and the rear had to do the same. Yet, they had already decided on a rendezvous point. With no casualties among them, they decided to regroup and launch another attack, not targeting the large enemy forces but looking for isolated cavalry units. They also expressed that they had no intention of starting the war, and that the other side too was educated by the elves, who remained their brethren even on the battlefield. At that time, a heavy snowfall began, and the female knight breathed a sigh of relief. This was the reinforcement they had been waiting for. Due to the snowfall, the demon clan's army had to withdraw, and the human soldiers sent were also forced to retreat due to a lack of provisions. Surprisingly, it turned out that the central church was in cahoots with the radical faction of the demon clan. The humans intended to plunder the food supplies and then abandon the prince's country to the demons. The cooperating radical demons were supposed to play the role of the enemy to the humans, allowing the nobles to continuously profit from the situation and the rulers to maintain their power indefinitely. For this, they even began to assemble a third expeditionary force, planning to kill Mao this time. Their so-called assassin turned out to be the muskets previously commissioned by Mao. The nobles killed the workers, seized the muskets, and prepared to mass-produce them for an attack on Mao and her allies. They aimed to seize the holy relic of the Light Elves and kill Mao. Meanwhile, the female mage entered a huge magical formation, likely a remnant from the era of the gods. After emerging from the demon palace, Mao had to appear before the public. Demons respect strength, and if this were the modern era, Mao would have been incapacitated for several months already. This emergence was to inspire her people and exert pressure on the radicals. Yusha, as a spectral knight, also made a public appearance, fully demonstrating the abilities of his subordinates. Upon seeing Yusha flatten a mountain with a single blow, the demons below cheered, while Yusha felt awkward due to the excessive power. Mao announced a meeting of all tribes, and everyone thought a full-scale war against humans was finally on the horizon, completely missing Mao's actual words. Deeply saddened by the misunderstanding, Mao felt the heavy weight of her responsibilities. Yusha comforted her, assuring her that he would always be by her side. During the winter, as food shortages affected various areas, merchants pushed potatoes as an alternative. People from other regions who tried the potatoes realized they were not the fruit of demons. The merchants also told the prince that they wanted to sign trade agreements and ceasefires with the demon clan. The prince did not refuse, wishing to learn more about the demons and feeling that the two races might not be as distant as presumed. The female knight also told Mao that during her absence, she had dedicated herself to Yusha. Mao was stunned. It was just the sword, not her body. She admitted it was because Yusha belonged to Mao, and they were also friends, both holding great affection for Yusha. Annoyed, Mao realized Yusha was truly a winner in life. Mao was also surprised and proud to see Ane evolve to such an extent, blossoming into a beautiful flower of freedom from her struggles, and was glad to have met these people.